Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro-Revenge Story. Back in the late 2010s, when social media was still somewhat innocent and less toxic than today, I was enrolled at my local community college. A few weeks into the semester, I moved in with my girlfriend to help us both save on rent. I'll call my girlfriend Emma for the purposes of this post. One evening, Emma mentioned she had invited a friend from one of her classes for a game night. Sounded good to me. We invited a couple of other friends, and it turned out to be a really fun night. Surprisingly, her friend, Mia, was someone I knew from high school. We weren't close friends, but we knew each other and got along fine. "Wait, don't I know you from Jefferson High?" I asked when she walked in. Mia's eyes widened. "Oh my god, yes! You were in Mr. Peterson's history class, right?" "That's me. Small world," I laughed. After that night, Mia was invited over pretty frequently for dinner, game nights, or to watch a movie. She even brought her boyfriend over a couple of times. I'll call him Ryan. But he never quite fit in. He would be quiet and/or standoffish, wouldn't engage much, and just seemed like he never wanted to be there. "What do you guys want to watch tonight?" I asked during one of those awkward evenings. "Whatever is fine," Ryan muttered, staring at his phone. Mia shot him a look. "Ryan, can you put your phone down for 5 minutes?" He just shrugged and continued scrolling. It was clear no one really felt comfortable having him there, but we invited him to be polite to Mia. Fortunately, he only came over 2 or 3 times and found an excuse to refuse every other time. A month or two after this all started, Mia called Emma crying and asked if she could come over. "Of course you can come over," Emma said, concern evident in her voice. "What's wrong?" "I'll explain when I get there," Mia sobbed through the phone. Of course we welcomed her. The story that was relayed was Ryan was getting very upset with Mia for coming over to our place so frequently and accused her of cheating on him. She never clarified if he thought she was cheating with me, Emma, or both, but any option was ridiculous and never happened. But he confronted her and started verbally assaulting her, calling her all kinds of nasty names. "He just lost it," Mia explained between sobs. "He called me a whore and said I was probably sleeping with both of you." At one point, she tried to walk past him to leave, and he shoved her back. This caused her to trip over a coffee table, fall, and get a huge bruise on her butt and lower back. Emma told me about the bruise as Mia had shown her. I didn't see it for myself. "I just wanted to get out of there," Mia said. "I never thought he'd put his hands on me." Mia swore up and down that he had never physically assaulted her before, and she believed it was just an accident, but I was pissed. I wanted revenge. You don't mess with my friends, and you don't assault women. I wanted to beat the crap out of him. But while I'm a very big guy, I've never been in a fight, and I'm not a violent person, but a revenge plan formed in my mind. "Are you going to be okay?" I asked Mia. "I think so. I just need some space from him." "You know you can stay here if you need to," Emma offered. At the time, I was working in the administration building of the school as a student employee. As part of my job, I could access anyone's student records, their fees, and their class schedule. The date was fast approaching. That was the last possible day to drop or add classes without penalty or specific permission, so I looked Ryan up in the system, got his student ID number and the other information that I needed, and put my plan into motion. On the last day to change schedules, I used the computer system in the administration building. This was before the school had fully implemented online self-service for students, and canceled all of his classes. Not only that, but I went through and added every class I could find that had a course fee. If you owed a debt at the school, you couldn't get copies of your transcripts or anything else. Something that I didn't mention was that Ryan was an international student, and couldn't stay in the country if he wasn't enrolled with a certain number of units. "What are you doing working so late?" my supervisor asked as I was finishing up. "Just catching up on some filing," I lied, quickly switching screens. I wish I could give more info about the fallout, but as I didn't want to get this traced back to me, I didn't tell anyone, nor did I pull up his records again for quite a while. I did get a little payoff, though. Mia was really worried about seeing him again. She had broken up with him the night after he pushed her, as they had a literature class together on Tuesdays. "I don't want to skip class, but I'm worried about seeing him," she told Emma over coffee at our place. "We'll figure something out," Emma assured her. Mia said that on Tuesday he was there, but there was also someone new standing in the class. He was standing because there weren't enough seats. The teacher, seeing that there were more people than should be, held roll. And guess who wasn't on it? You're right. It was Ryan. "You should have seen his face," Mia told us later, barely containing a smile. "He turned bright red and started arguing with Professor Garcia." "What did the professor say?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "She just kept saying, 'I'm sorry, but you're not on my roster. You'll need to check with the registrar.'" Apparently, after I dropped all his classes, someone on the wait list got in. Ryan tried to argue with the teacher, but as the professor had the official class roster and Ryan wasn't on it, there was nothing he could do. Mia said she never saw Ryan in that class again. It's weird, she told us a week later. He texted me all angry about being dropped from his classes, but I blocked him. I don't know much more about what happened. Emma and I eventually broke up, so I didn't see Mia very often after that. After a while, I did look up Ryan's class schedule, and all of the classes with course fees were gone, but he didn't have any other classes on the books either. I wanted to assume he was kicked out of school, but I didn't try to confirm it. Either way, Mia didn't have to have a class with him, and while he probably deserved more, he was definitely inconvenienced and possibly kicked out of school. Sometimes I worry I was too harsh, but then I remember that he deserved it. Do you ever think about what happened with Ryan? Emma asked me once, months later when we bumped into each other. Sometimes, I admitted, but I don't regret it. Mess with me, but not my friends. The next one is an entitled people story. I've been working as an environmental engineer for the better part of 2 decades now, specializing in sustainable water management and ecosystem restoration. So when my wife and I bought our house in a newer development with an HOA, one of the first things I did was design a natural pond system in our backyard. It wasn't just some hole filled with water. This was a legitimate biodiverse ecosystem complete with native plants, natural filtration, and a recirculation system that actually improved local water quality. The pond took me 3 months to build. I pulled all the necessary permits from the county, had everything inspected and approved, and even went above and beyond by registering it with the state's wildlife habitat program. The county inspector actually spent an extra hour just admiring the design because it was such a textbook example of how residential water features should be constructed. I had proper drainage overflow systems, natural algae control through native plant selection, and even created graduated depths to support different species of beneficial insects and amphibians. Fast forward 6 months after completion, and I'm working from home one morning when I see someone standing at my back fence line taking pictures. I walked outside to find this woman. I'll call her the HOA president because that's exactly who she was. Literally leaning over my fence with her phone out, snapping photos like she was documenting a crime scene. When I asked if I could help her, she barely looked at me before launching into this accusation about how I'd built an illegal pond without HOA approval. I explained that I had pulled all county permits and the pond was completely legal. She cut me off and said that didn't matter because I hadn't submitted an architectural review application to the HOA. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I had actually read through the HOA rules pretty carefully when we bought the house. The covenant specifically mentioned that any permanent structures required architectural review, but the definition section clearly stated that landscaping features under a certain square footage were exempt. My pond fell well under that threshold. I pointed this out to her. She wasn't having it. She told me that standing water constituted a health hazard and the HOA had authority over anything that could affect property values or resident safety. Then she actually threatened to fine me $500 per day until I removed it. The conversation ended with her saying she'd be reporting this to the county code enforcement and the health department because clearly I didn't know what I was doing. I went back inside and told my wife what happened. She knows how I get when people challenge me on my literal area of expertise, so she just sighed and said to do whatever I needed to do. That evening, I received an official HOA violation notice in my mailbox. It demanded I appear before the HOA board at their next meeting to explain my illegal pond installation and be prepared to present a removal timeline. The letter also mentioned they'd already filed complaints with the county code enforcement, the health department, and the Environmental Protection Agency. This is where the malicious compliance kicked in. Instead of just showing up to the meeting with my permits, I decided to give them exactly what they asked for: a full, comprehensive presentation about my pond. I spent the next week preparing a 40-slide PowerPoint presentation complete with engineering diagrams, water quality test results, biodiversity surveys, and legal documentation. I printed out copies of every single permit, inspection report, and approval letter. I even contacted the state wildlife program and got a letter of commendation for creating certified habitat, but I didn't stop there. Since they'd filed complaints with actual regulatory agencies, those agencies had to respond. The county sent out an inspector who spent 2 hours examining my pond and reviewing my documentation. He was actually thrilled because apparently they rarely see residential water features done correctly. He issued an official letter stating the pond exceeded all county requirements and served as a model for sustainable residential water management. The health department inspector was similarly impressed. She tested the water quality and found it cleaner than most natural ponds in the area. No mosquito breeding, no stagnant water issues, proper circulation. Another glowing report. The EPA complaint was my favorite. Since I'd involved federal programs through the Wildlife Habitat Certification, an actual EPA environmental scientist got assigned to review it. He came out, spent 3 hours examining everything, and ended up asking if he could use my pond as a case study for a presentation he was doing on residential ecosystem management. So I showed up to that HOA meeting with a banker's box full of documentation and my laptop ready to go. There were maybe 15 people in the room, mostly board members and a few neighbors who'd heard about the controversy. The HOA president looked smug when I walked in, like she'd already won. The meeting started and she immediately went into this long speech about maintaining property values and how unregulated construction projects threaten the whole community. Then she turned to me and asked me to explain myself. I smiled and said I'd be happy to give them the complete presentation they'd requested. I hooked up my laptop to their projector and started going through everything. Permit approvals, inspection reports, engineering specifications, water quality data, biodiversity surveys, letters of commendation from 3 separate government agencies. About 10 slides in, I noticed the HOA president's face getting red. By slide 20, she tried to interrupt and say this wasn't necessary. I politely pointed out that the violation notice had specifically demanded a full explanation, and I was simply complying with their request. Then I got to the really good part. While preparing my presentation, I'd done a little research on the HOA's own properties and common areas. Turns out they had several violations of their own that nobody had bothered to address. The decorative fountain at the community entrance, not properly permitted and creating a genuine mosquito breeding hazard, the retention pond by the playground, improperly maintained and actually violating state stormwater management regulations, the irrigation system for the common areas, using twice the water allowance permitted by county drought restrictions. I included all of this in my presentation, complete with photos, county records, and relevant regulations. I made it clear that I'd discovered these issues while researching my own pond's compliance, and as a licensed environmental engineer, I felt obligated to bring them to the board's attention. The room got very quiet. One of the other board members asked if I was certain about this information. I said absolutely, and I'd be happy to provide copies of everything to the county if they needed an official review. The HOA president tried to shut down the meeting, but another board member cut her off and asked me directly if my pond was legal. I confirmed it was not only legal, but had been commended by multiple agencies as an example of proper design. He then asked what it would take to bring the HOA's own properties into compliance. I pulled out a preliminary assessment I'd prepared. The retention pond needed about $15,000 in remediation work. The fountain needed to be properly permitted and redesigned, probably another $8,000. The irrigation system needed a complete overhaul to meet current water use restrictions, which would run close to $30,000. Total estimated cost to bring everything into compliance, around $53,000. Oh, and if they didn't address these issues within 90 days of being officially notified, the county and state could start issuing fines. Daily fines. To the HOA, which meant special assessments for all the homeowners. The other board members immediately started arguing with the HOA president about how she'd created this entire situation. Apparently several people had questioned her about why she was so focused on my pond when there were actual maintenance issues she'd been ignoring for months. Someone mentioned that she'd been making decisions without full board votes. It got heated pretty quickly. The meeting ended with the board voting unanimously to rescind my violation notice and issue a formal apology. They also voted to remove the HOA president from her position, effective immediately, and to launch a full review of all HOA properties for code compliance. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the new HOA president thanking me for bringing the compliance issues to their attention and asking if I'd be willing to consult on the remediation work at a professional rate. I agreed. Partially because the money was good, but mostly because it meant I got to oversee fixing all the problems the previous president had ignored. The former HOA president tried to fight her removal, but once the other homeowners found out she'd nearly triggered $50,000 in mandatory repairs through her vendetta against my completely legal pond, she didn't get much support. She ended up moving out of the neighborhood about 6 months later. My pond is still there, still beautiful, still completely legal, and now actually mentioned in the HOA's updated guidelines as an example of approved sustainable landscaping. The county even featured it in their annual Environmental Stewardship Awards. Sometimes the best malicious compliance is just being extremely thorough when someone demands you explain yourself. The next one is a petty revenge story. Years ago, I rented a duplex from a very nice owner. He was honest and reasonable. I put a healthy security deposit down and moved in. Unfortunately, he was not my day-to-day contact. That was the delightful and charming Giselle. She was the on-site landlord. I found out later that she was a tenant who the owner made an arrangement with. In return for cutting her rent in half, a sweet gig, she collected and deposited the rental checks, arranged repairs, and handled any other day-to-day things. The neighborhood had about 5 duplexes owned by this man. Giselle hated me from day one, and what's more, she lived in the other half of the duplex. You know all the nightmare petty landlord stuff you see on this sub? Giselle ticked off all the boxes. HOA-style Karen obsessed with the rules. Yelled at my friends for parking an inch over on her side of the duplex. My phone or doorbell rang if my place wasn't stone quiet a minute after quiet time. Rental checks I dropped in the same mail slot I always did somehow got lost. Appliances and things not fixed in anything resembling a timely manner, etc., etc. It was more annoying than awful. I told myself I could live with it, as I was going to be moving closer to my job after my lease ran out. Later, I found out why she hates me. She had wanted a friend of hers to move into the duplex I got. But the owner said no because her credit check was awful and mine was sparkling, so she just wanted to make my life miserable out of pure spite. As the end of the lease drew closer, I noticed my water heater was leaking. I dried the floor around it and then put some towels down. Then I emailed Giselle. I had wised up and started a digital trail by then. No response. A week later, I re-forwarded the email with a friendly, "You may have missed this, but this could be a real problem." No response. Another email with, "I had a friend who is a plumber look at it and he recommended immediately." Finally, she responded with, "I will look into it," and nothing else. She was just trying to run the clock out on me. It had been about a month now, and I was just a few weeks away from moving out. I saw Giselle watering her flowers and approached her and mentioned it. She blew me off, but finished the convo with a threat. "I hope you're keeping it clean around there. I'm a stickler when it comes to the final inspection. If you want to get any of your deposit back, you better be ready to pass a white glove inspection." Okay then, that's how we're going to play it? Fine. I was trying to figure out how I would get petty revenge. About a week later, right before my last rent check was due, I happened to see the owner in the neighborhood. Giselle was nowhere to be found, and that's when it struck me how I could make all this work. I went out to say hello and tell him thanks for renting to me, that I appreciated that. He was very friendly, said he was sorry I was leaving, etc., and if I needed anything to let him know, checkmate. I asked him if he had a few minutes to come in and do the security deposit inspection. He said sure, and we went into my place together. As we were walking around looking at things, he was all positive. "Yep, looks great. Yep, no issues there." Then we came to the water heater. I paused dramatically and gravely said, "I hope we can come to some kind of understanding about the floor around the water heater." I opened the closet doors and showed him. I told him what I'd been doing to fight the leak. I pulled up the sopping wet towels I had put down the night before, and I told him I've had experience with mold and that it was nasty stuff. He got quiet and said, "Have you told Giselle about this?" "Why, yes, I did, and here are copies of the emails I sent to her." He read them and then noticed I had kept them in a file folder. He looked at me and said, "Are there other things that haven't been fixed?" I showed him a few other emails I had collected. He got beet red in the face and said, "Okay, I think with what I have seen, I'm fine with releasing your full security deposit." In that moment, it struck me. I had one more rent check due, $750. How about instead of me writing you a check for $750 and you writing me a check for $500, I just write you a check for $250 and call it even? He shrugged and said, "Sure." He signed the paperwork and then left. A few days later, I dropped my check for $250 in the mail slot. Later that evening, Giselle pounded on my door, foaming at the mouth about how I didn't write a full check. She can get me evicted if I don't write a check for the full amount right freaking now, I explained, conveniently omitting that the owner had done the inspection. That $750 less my security deposit of $500 was the $250. Giselle's eyes widened as her brain tried to comprehend what I had said. She nearly exploded, yelling at me about, "That's not how things are done, and you have to obey the rules like everyone else, and she has final say because she does the inspections." Friends, she literally had spittle flying out of her mouth. She was so enraged. I calmly told her that the owner had done the inspection and signed off on the payment arrangement and told her to talk to him and to get off my porch and quit bothering me. And I very slowly closed the door on her. Again, her brain froze and she went into lockdown trying to process what I had just said. That was an image I'll remember forever. Before I moved out, the owner came by to ask if he could come in and fix the water heater for the next tenant. I said sure. As he was working, we talked a little and he mentioned that his daughter was moving into my place and that she was going to take over the on-site landlord duties. I asked about Giselle. The owner simply said she's going to be moving out. She decided she couldn't afford to pay the full rent anymore. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So, for context, I'm currently a head cashier at Home Depot. I work in a higher volume store that remodeled the front end, where our registers are, a couple months ago, where our central checkout is now entirely self-checkout registers, referred to as SCO. While it's SCO, it's known as assisted SCO, and they want us to be assisting as much as possible. 6 items or more, high-price items, and anything that could hide anything inside of it are a must, as well as pushing credit card applications. Now here's where there's been a huge issue, starting with the cashiers not pushing credit enough, so we fell behind on our goal. So last week, to make up for it, around halfway through the week, my supervisor told us she wanted everyone physically on a register. Head cashiers included. They don't even want us checking the schedule to send breaks, or the cashier's home, even though no one is allowed to get overtime. Unless there's money to handle, we aren't allowed off of a register. I bet some of you can understand how frustrating that is. It's literally a SCO. I'm having more people starting to get upset that we're constantly helping them than when we changed it to a SCO, and had a ton of people angry there aren't any normal registers in the main area of the store, too. 3 normal registers open total on the opposite ends of the store, and that's it. And me and the other head cashiers weren't complying the entire time about staying on a register 100% of the time because we were going to prioritize at least knowing when to send breaks and our cashiers home, even if it meant us getting into trouble. Well, today was Black Friday, and my supervisor, along with the store manager and a few other managers, were lurking around almost constant. A couple actually helped, which was appreciated, but I digress. The other day, I mentioned to my supervisor when she insisted head cashiers had to stay on a register, how we were supposed to send breaks or how we would direct the line, because most people won't walk to an open register even when SCO is empty. She told me to figure it out, and if I have to keep my head on a swivel so I can check customers out and get the line down, then so be it. So, I let them run the show. They put me on a register. I complied. I only left when I was told to cover for someone going home or to use the bathroom. My lunch was 2 hours late. I didn't say anything until an hour and a half after the fact because I rarely get my breaks on time anyways, but my lunch is mandatory because no overtime. My lunch wasn't the only break late though. When I finally got to go on my lunch, one of my cashiers came back from the bathroom and we both saw his 15-minute break was nearly an hour late. I apologized and let him know I hadn't been allowed to check the schedule, or I would have sent him already. I told him to go, but let him know he should double-check with our supervisor just in case, since that would mean 2 people would be leaving at once. Then, I come back from my lunch and find out one of our full-time cashiers was forgotten on one of the few normal registers and was actively building overtime. Something, if I was physically there for, would have never happened as she leaves at the same time every day. Except, I was on my lunch, 2 hours late. Then later, I'm sent to garden to cover a lunch over half an hour late. When I got back inside, another cashier calls because his 15 is over half an hour late. Almost 45 minutes. That's just some of what happened. I wasn't allowed to do my job, and therefore my cashiers were actively being forgotten about because it wasn't important enough. Oh, and we got just as much credit card applications as we did early last week before we were forced to constantly be on registers. It's not about being on a register, it's about asking in general. Something I may not like, but I do because it's my job. Or at least it was. After seeing how me not doing my job to comply with dumb rules that makes no sense affected my cashiers today, and the fact I got a call back from another job, I put my 2 weeks in. Just to seal the deal after a crappy day. But I'm happy. I'm leaving Hell Depot and couldn't be happier. I just worry for my cashiers who are probably going to continue to suffer with these new rules and regulations. And especially if anyone above them actually complies to them 100%. Super late edit. Hi, sorry. I meant to get back on here, but life got kinda crazy for a bit. There is some things I'd like to make more clear. I was a head cashier, meaning I was a part of management, even if it was just lower management. What my bosses were doing on Black Friday was my job, but they should have been able to do it without issue. They just didn't care. Regardless, some not-so-interesting things happened for the first 2 weeks I stayed. I did stay an extra week for some convenience for myself, but that's really the only extra context needed. My store manager didn't speak a word to me the rest of the time I worked there. Not a once. Usually he'd greet me if not anyone else, and I thought that might have been the end of the backlash until about a week and a half in. My supervisor started on another suggestion that made 0 sense for the work we do, but she wouldn't know as she's rarely around. She suggested having us sign into the SCO registers and treat them like normal registers. Huge issue with that. They won't take cash if you do that. It completely soft locks the system. We learned that when one of our cashier's credentials weren't working for a single day, and well, yeah, I told her it wouldn't work and how it wouldn't work, and thought that was the end of it. Apparently not. My very last week, I had two of the other head cashiers telling me how our supervisor was taking pretty much my every little action and trying to twist it, which is ironic because she knew there was a possibility of me leaving because I lived pretty far, and the job was physically taxing on my body, why I mentioned in some comments primarily I was already wanting to leave for multiple reasons. So, she knew, and I also was mentally checked out, sure, but if I caught myself, I actively tried to do better. I hate feeling lazy. I was also open with her constantly. Black Friday was an irritating day with her, but I didn't dislike her entirely. Just annoyed with how she works since I've been in her position before and she was actually lazy. The only thing I could comment was her customer service. But specifically, right before I was leaving, her and one of the other supervisors in her clique weren't being very professional. I won't get too into detail because I really don't want to give it energy anymore, but there was an accident. I made a small mistake. I personally apologized to the other supervisor, letting her know what happened, and she literally refused to speak to me. Very mature, I know, and everyone who heard about the situation chalked it up to being another reason both my supervisor and the other one shouldn't have been supervisors. It was kind of wild, but to be honest, I didn't let it get to me, as I had literally a single shift left after it all went down. Anyways, it's been a few weeks since I left. The holidays happened, New Year's happened. I hope you all had good ones. I'm doing okay. Feeling less angry in general, as I typically am a fairly passive person. This post is not the most indicative of my character, but it was fun nonetheless. I appreciated a lot of the conversations, but had to stop replying as I was spending far too much time online, and that's not usually me either. Reddit is something I typically use once in a blue moon, and I deleted most of my social media for my mental health. So this was a breath of fresh air, getting to vent, but also having genuine conversations with people. So if you were one of those people, I want to thank you. Genuinely. I hope you all have good lives, and please be kind to your customer service workers. Anyway, thank you.